Julian Assange is one of the greatest journalists of our age. He spent his entire adult life bringing previously concealed facts to the public about what our leaders are doing. That is the very definition of journalism. Yet Julian Assange is not a hero in America's newsrooms. He's an enemy. Assange made the mistake of offending the media's real constituency, which is not the public, but the powerful. For doing this, journalists accuse Assange of being what they are, a political operative posing as a reporter. In 2010, Assange and his organization, WikiLeaks, published an enormous cache of secret documents that revealed what the US government had been doing in Iraq. Included was a 38-minute gun sight video that depicted Apache helicopters mowing down a group of civilians in Baghdad, including 2 Reuters employees.
There's more that keep walking by, and one of them has a weapon.
Roger, received.
See all those people standing down there?
Oh, yeah. That's a weapon.
Yeah. Hotel 26 is Crazy Horse 18.
I'll bet
Is that an RPG?
All right, we got a guy with an RPG.
Having a fire? Oh, we got a guy shooting. Now he's behind the building. Come on, fire.
Hey, Roger. Keep shooting. Keep shooting. All right, we just engaged all 8 individuals.
The video is a problem for the government because officials had lied about what happened that day. At one point, the Pentagon claimed the video didn't even exist. Assange proved that it did. A few years later, Assange upended a presidential race by publishing a trove of internal emails from the Democratic Party. Democrats claimed the emails had been hacked by the Russian government, but they hadn't been. That was a lie. The emails had been leaked from within the DNC itself, almost certainly by a disgruntled employee. Those emails proved that Hillary Clinton's campaign had rigged the 2016 Democratic primary against Bernie Sanders. It was the scoop of the decade, but it was only one of many that Julian Assange broke. For the crime of upstaging them and embarrassing their patrons, the media hated Julian Assange even more.
And especially with Assange, what bothers me the most is that he hides under this sort of broad definition of a journalist. And we have to come out and say that this is not, stealing and using disinformation for a foreign government is not journalism.
This is a no-brainer. This guy, Julian Assange, directed and led an organization that led to the largest breach of classified information in U.S. history. This is not some do-gooder whistleblower.
Assange is a criminal. He's damaged national security. Assange isn't a journalist.
He's a criminal, squeaked the faithful servants of power. Embarrassed governments around the world agreed. The government of Sweden, acting in concert with British authorities, charged Assange with a fake sex crime. He's a rapist, they said. Global media amplified the lie. Ultimately, the charges were dropped for lack of evidence. But by that point, Julian Assange was a prisoner. He'd been driven into internal exile in the Ecuadorian embassy in London, where he sought political asylum. He spent more than 7 years there, unable to leave. Then, in 2017, Assange broke his last big story. WikiLeaks revealed the existence of an illegal CIA spying program. Assange withheld most of the details of that program so as not to compromise American national security. But the story was still deeply humiliating to the CIA. In Washington, CIA Director Mike Pompeo decided to murder him. Pompeo discussed with his deputies how the CIA might kidnap Assange from the embassy in London or poison him inside. That is not conjecture. Multiple witnesses heard Mike Pompeo say that. At the time, keep in mind, Julian Assange had not been charged with any crime in the United States. Mike Pompeo considered it a death penalty offense to embarrass the CIA. You may be asking, is any of this legal? Can federal appointees use tax dollars to kill people who annoy them? Well, not technically. Mike Pompeo committed a felony, conspiracy to commit murder. And yet somehow, Mike Pompeo is not in prison. Instead, he's the toast of the donor class, a friend and advisor to the most powerful people in America. It's Julian Assange who's in prison for the crime of offending Mike Pompeo. Assange is currently being held behind bars by the British government, which has not charged him with any crime. Assange now sits in the most fortified penitentiary in the UK, Belmarsh, where every murderer in London is held. He's been there for more than 4 years, trapped in solitary confinement, cut off from his wife and 2 children, wasting away alone among killers and mental patients, and awaiting extradition to the United States for trial. Assange has been charged in the U.S. under the century-old Espionage Act, a transparently unconstitutional law which is used almost exclusively to punish political crimes. Yet Julian Assange has never committed espionage. Nor does the U.S. government have any real interest in trying him under that law. His current incarceration is the whole point. Torture Assange to death in jail so he will never again speak publicly. It's all so grotesque and so immoral that it's hard to believe it's actually happening in public view. Belmarsh authorities will not allow Assange to be interviewed, lest his case bring more embarrassment to the CIA. But we decided to travel there to see him anyway. It's early in the morning, the sun has just come up. We're driving through London to Belmarsh prison to see Julian Assange. We're with his wife, Stella, in a bus. It's raining. And we're going to try to get through the cordon of maximum security guards and administrators to see him, not for an interview. No cameras are allowed, but for a conversation. How hard is it to get from the gate to see him?
Well, it's a process. So initially, you're in an external building called the Visitor Center, and they check your ID, and they take your fingerprints. They give you a badge, and you have to leave everything behind. Everything. I mean, you can't take a watch or a handkerchief or anything like that, a pen. And then you go into the main building, and then there are airlocks. So you go through the first airlock, they take your fingerprint again, they check your badge, look at your VO, it's called visiting order. And then they let you through to the kind of airport security area. So you put your shoes, your belts, jacket on in an X-ray machine. Then they check you first with you go through an arch. Then they check you with a wand under your feet and front and back. Then you go to a pat-down search, and they look inside your mouth, behind your ears and your hair, and then pat you down under your feet as well. And then you can put your shoes back on. Then you go through another airlock, and then you cross a yard, and then you get into the interior building. Check your fingerprints again. Then there's a dog search. And once the dog search is through, then you're through to the visiting hall where they take your fingerprints again.
Are you filled with rage toward the people who are doing this?
I'm beyond rage, you know. I think I don't understand the cruelty. I mean, I don't understand how people can be human beings and actually go along with it or drive it, you know. I don't understand how a human being can do this to another human being. And just the effect it has on Julian, what is being done to him, you know. He doesn't have contact with the outside world, and the little contact he has is with, you know, very serious criminals, and violent people, and, you know, dangerous people, and that he can't be with his family, that we're only able to see him a few hours, 1 or 2 hours a week. It's just, you know, it's kind of, rage doesn't describe it, because I'm in the middle of it, and I just cannot understand it.
So we're going into prison to be fingerprinted 4 times and searched and sniffed by dogs in order to visit the notorious terrorist criminal Julian Assange, who has not actually been charged with anything. We're heading out. Oh! Say a prayer.
So we're gonna do a sit down, but any quick thoughts?
Well, that's just a total outrage. I mean, it's a total outrage that they're holding that man who hasn't committed or even been charged with a crime in this country. I mean, that's a, you know, maximum security prison filled with murderers, and the people who reside there, the inmates, are treated like animals. And he's not an animal, he's a journalist who has committed no crime. And so anyone who's in favor of that, anyone who supports his continued torture, is your enemy. He was the enemy of free expression, of free speech, of the basic liberties that used to define the United States. So, you know, the people who support that should have to answer for it, in my opinion. It's disgusting what they're doing. Disgusting. Assange looks like press photographs of him, maybe older, pale. He hasn't been outside in 13 years. Bearded, longish hair. He's a big man, tall. He seemed better physically than press accounts had led me to believe. I keep reading that he's ailing. I'm not his doctor. I just spent, a little over an hour talking to him, but I thought he seemed very focused. He seemed much more cognitively dialed in than I was led to believe. Dressed in gray sweatshirt and sweatpants, prison issued. He's a prisoner. All the prisoners in the room had fluorescent yellow armbands to signify they were the prisoners. And, I was very focused on the conversation with him because there was a lot I wanted to ask him and a lot I've been thinking about as I've watched his case over the last, almost 20 years. So I had a lot of questions, but it was hard not to notice, if you've never been in a prison meeting room, there's a lot of human drama unfolding all around you. And little children, he has little children. He and Stella have little kids. And it's just, it's heartbreaking to see prisoners with their children or their wives. And as someone who's been married for over 30 years, the idea of being separated from your wife for any period of time is, it makes you feel claustrophobic thinking about it. We talked about why he is in prison. And my first question to him was, what do you think this is actually about, since you haven't been accused of a crime? And he said something that really struck me, and I think having spent my life in Washington is absolutely right. He said he first became famous when WikiLeaks published documents and videos that the US government had kept secret from the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. They were gravely embarrassing to the Pentagon. But that wasn't the red line. The red line was several years later when WikiLeaks published information about surveillance by the CIA. And so I asked him directly, are you aware of anyone being harmed or killed on the basis of information that he published? He said, of course not. And he said it in a sincere way. Like, by the way, I think if people were killed because of his publishing, because of the stories that he put online, he would feel bad about it. He seems like a humane person. He withheld information about CIA because he didn't want to get people hurt. He famously published the contents of Hillary Clinton's email account going back to the late 2010s, 2009, 2010, as I remember. And there were enormously embarrassing details in these emails, including the texts of her suck-up speeches to Goldman Sachs. And at the time, she was pretending to be a friend of the people or whatever. This was really damaging to her, and she was enraged by it. And he was also at the center of really one of the baffling stories of our time, which was the leak of the emails from the Democratic National Committee, which were blamed on Russia. Russia clearly had nothing to do with it. There's no evidence Russia had anything to do with it at all. And I think there are quite a few indications that those emails were leaked by a DNC employee who was mad that the Hillary Clinton campaign was being helped by the DNC and the Bernie Sanders campaign was being hurt. Very interesting. Very interesting story with a lot of lying and potentially some other things. But I asked him, when you published these emails, did you realize how powerful Hillary Clinton was? And we had a conversation about that, and I said, looking back, do you regret doing that? He goes, honestly, it was fun. And I love that.